Well, the week is zooming by, and with us Matthew. How are you today, Matthew?
It's a sign of how old we're getting, I think, Chris. The weeks do seem to zoom by. It seems to be we blink and there's another week gone.
Now, let's firstly talk about one of my popular pastimes, Netflix. I confess, why is Netflix being sued by an internet provider in South Korea? Has Netflix broken the internet?
I think it just about has over in South Korea, in fact, all parts of the world, because some of their programs, some of the content that they've been buying Netflix at the moment has been very popular. And the latest one, and they've actually invested a fair bit of money in some South Korean content, but the latest one is called Squid Game. It's the number one program. Have you watched Squid Game yet?
Oh, I started it yesterday. It was atrocious. I mean, the start of it, I just couldn't get into it. I was about 30 minutes worth.
I must admit, my kids watched it, and I kind of stuck my head in the lounge room, had a bit of a look, and went, it doesn't look that good. But I'm out of touch, Chris. Maybe you and I are both out of touch with the rest of the world, because it's the number one program on Netflix in 90 countries at the moment. So it is
right around the world.
Right around the world. Unbelievable. But in South Korea, and one internet provider in particular, is saying that Netflix is creating so much traffic that they should be paying that internet service provider. In fact, they should be paying all internet service providers in South Korea for how much traffic they're generating. Interestingly enough, Amazon, Apple and Facebook all do actually pay the internet service providers in South Korea. YouTube, or Google if you like, who own YouTube and Netflix don't pay any money, and that's why SK Broadband in South Korea is actually suing Netflix. Now, they've said that internet traffic has gone up from the middle of 2018, in May 2018, till now. Internet traffic has increased 24 times, so 24-fold. And they're putting most of that down to Netflix. They're blaming it all on Netflix. Now, obviously, Netflix is saying, well, hold on, our job is just to provide some content. Your job is to get the connection between our content and your customers, so we shouldn't be having to pay you any money. But I think this is going to go on for a little bit longer, because the court system in South Korea is probably going to fall in the favour of their local broadband provider, in my opinion, rather than falling in the favour of Netflix. Netflix does actually pay one American service provider, but only because they get higher levels of service from that service provider, not just paying for the amount of traffic they generate. So it is quite incredible where we're headed. Good old free-to-air, it's looking like a vague second place at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I'll battle on with Squid Game. Maybe it'll start to grow on me a bit.
Oh, look, don't fall in with all the sheep, Chris. Just because 90 countries have it as a number one program, I didn't like it that much. I watched it and went, I couldn't get into it a bit the same as you.
Missing something. All right, how long is the world's longest subsea power cable? And why is this important for the future of the planet, Matthew?
I think it's important for the future of the planet, and possibly even the future of Australia. This new cable joins up Norway across to Great Britain. It's a 724-kilometre cable run under the North Sea. Now, that's to basically equal out some of the provision of power around some parts of Europe, and obviously Norway in particular, but there's other plans, there's other cables in place now and other plans for cables going forward. At the moment, power in Norway is quite cheap. It's generated mostly by hydropower, so it's quite cheap to generate that power. It's good because it's renewable power. Power in Great Britain is actually quite expensive, and most of that's still done by good old fossil fuels, burning of fossil fuels. So at the moment, Great Britain is going to be a net importer of power. Now you can imagine these cables running underneath the sea. They're fair-sized cables, about 15 centimetres in diameter. There's a couple of them running power under the North Sea, about 1,400 megawatt capacity. So if you just relied on that alone, that'd power about 1.4 million homes in England. So a fair amount of capacity there. But the future is the interconnectedness of the power grid, and this is where we're really headed. So at some point by the year 2025 or a little bit later is the estimation that the number of wind turbines being constructed in Great Britain at the moment, they'll actually be able to start exporting power back across to Norway and back to some other European countries. So the idea is that as you get different ways of generating power, might be hydro, might be wind, might be solar, then you need all that grid interconnectedness so you can share that power generation. Where it applies to Australia is that we have got a huge chunk of land in the middle of this country, Chris, and not a lot's happening with some of that. Out in the Simpson Desert, you've got a lot of space there with not much happening. So we could generate a huge amount of solar power, and we've got countries like Papua New Guinea, we've got the Philippines, we've got some, even Singapore, we've got some places like that are close enough that we could run an undersea cable and start providing power there. Some people have even talked about China. It's obviously a bit more of a stretch to get across to China, but that's the sort of thing that's possible. It needs a fair investment by someone because this cable alone cost €2 billion, but I think there's some possibilities there for Australia going forward.
Now, automakers around the world have witnessed declining sales, mainly on the back of Chippergeddon. What happened with Tesla sales for the same time frame?
Well, Tesla sales have gone quite well. They've actually had an increase again. They've had their best quarter ever. So we're talking about the July to September quarter of sales around the world. They sold 241,000 cars. That's 102,000 more than same time last year. And go back to the previous quarter, the second quarter of this year, it's 40,000 more than they sold in that quarter. Now, it used to be a bit of a joke with companies like General Motors and Ford when Tesla were getting to the stage where they're getting maybe 20,000 a month, 30,000 a month, and some of those companies would laugh at Tesla and say, we do that many cars in a day. Why are you taking a month to generate that many cars? Well, General Motors, who have had a decline in sales because of the lack of chips around, they've actually only sold 446,000 cars in that same quarter. So, it's not too far away. We're getting to the stage where they're less than double the number of sales of Tesla. So when they used to laugh at Tesla is slowly building there and getting to that stage where maybe they'll overtake them at some point in the future. So Tesla have been able to do this on the back of a few things. They've actually generated some of their own manufacturing. So some of the chip shortages that you see from different companies around the world, they've actually got their own chip manufacturing process, but also their own in-house programming so they can actually make changes to the chips that they can get their hands on to actually adapt them to still work with their cars. So it's one of the things that sometimes people look at someone like Toyota who does this great just-in-time manufacturing around the world, and that's really efficient way of manufacturing if you can get good supply of parts. But someone like Tesla, when the supply of parts is a bit tough, which it is at the moment, sometimes their manufacturing processes can be better.
Mathew Dickerson is with us for Tech Talk. Now, is the future of cropping open expanses of land or high-rise buildings?
Well, for people around Burke, for example, they'd say we need these big chunks of land to grow all of our various crops in. But obviously there are some parts in the world that don't have the luxury that we have in Australia, where we've got lots of sunlight and we've got lots of land. There are some places that don't have those two advantages, and a lot of places in Europe are in exactly those situations. So they're actually building high-rise apartments of plant growing facilities. So there's one at the moment that's been built just outside Copenhagen. It's called Nordic Harvest. It's the equivalent of a 14-storey apartment block, and they're growing plants on all those different levels. There's one big open warehouse, but they've got levels of all these plants. They actually have renewable power to generate the equivalent of sun. There's LED lights that give it the equivalent of sun. They recycle water through the facility, uses 250 times less water compared to conventional agriculture. It's able to produce the produce all year round. So that's really important as well, because they're not relying on sun or rain or weather conditions. This whole facility can be used all year round. They believe they don't need any pesticides inside because they keep it as a sealed facility, so you're not getting pesticides coming in from the outside. It generates 80 times less greenhouse gases, so it sounds pretty good. Again, I don't think we'll see it in Australia in the near future, but in places like New York or London, places that are highly or very densely populated, I think this can be a great solution for them. And the other advantage, Chris, is you're not having to transport the produce very far from where it's grown, which is typically in the city itself, to where it's actually consumed, where all the population is in the city. So don't be scared if you're a farmer in Burke. You're not going to be put out of business tomorrow. I think this will apply to some of those highly populated areas around the world.
And this is interesting. There might finally be a solution to make people on a video call look a bit better.
One of my great frustrations, I do it sometimes, Chris. I try and avoid it, but sometimes I'll be on a video call and I'll just say, can you just change your lights and just put it so it's not looking up your nose? And you kind of feel like you're almost lecturing to people sometimes. There's some basic things that you think, surely you can just get it right. And I think this manufacturer in particular has said, we give up. We give up on people actually having some idea of how to make themselves look reasonable on a video call. So they've built a monitor that's got one idea in its, well, one purpose in its entire life, and that's to make people look good on a video call. So for a start, they've got the video camera in the right place, not down low, up high, so that you can actually look at the face, not look up someone's nose. It's a nice 21-inch monitor, so you can see the person at the other end quite easily. It's got the video cam or the webcam centered, so you look like you're looking at the person at the other end. And then they've built lights into the actual monitor. So rather than having some lights come from above and then you've got these big dark shadows and you look like a bit of a creeper, or you've got all these light from behind from maybe some sun outside, you have the lights coming from where it's needed right in front of you. It's a soft light so people don't look too harsh or they don't get a big reflection off their forehead if they've got too much forehead space, for example. So it makes them look good, but it also makes it easy to use. And that's the other thing that I find frustrating, Chris. You start a video call, and for the first 5 minutes, people are mucking around. Hold on, where's the volume? How do I get this turned on? My headset's not working. So this is made to be easy to use. It's got high quality microphones and speakers built into it, so you can actually use it straight out of the box, or you can actually plug in a headset to it. And again, it's all designed to be easy to use and make people look good. The only disappointment I've got, Chris, is why has it taken us 18 months to get there? We needed this 18 months ago when everyone started going down to lockdown.
Now, of course, Facebook was down yesterday, causing a lot of frustration for everybody that loves Facebook. I think we had before the courts as well.
Yep.
Does anyone out there have a Facebook community page, or are you concerned about legal action over defamatory comments?
Well, this is a really big issue, Chris, and I think we've got a long way to go in this particular issue. There's a High Court ruling that basically said that the organisations that create Facebook pages are liable for defamation that occurs on those pages. And so most people thought, well, that applies to media organisations, for example. They might have a Facebook page, they put a story up, people come in and start saying all sorts of terrible or defamatory comments on there, and it's up to the moderator of that site to make sure they remove those comments and basically regulate that. But the real issue here is when we have, for example, community groups. So people that are just doing things to keep the community informed about what's happening in their community. And there's lots of those pages around, lots of towns, lots of groups, lots of sporting groups have them. But if someone goes and makes some defamatory comments on those pages, at this stage the court's ruling that the person who has set up that page or moderates that page, they're liable. Now, they don't have necessarily the bank balance of some large media organisations. They may not have any insurances in place, the same as some of those large organisations might do. So some of these community groups are saying it's too much risk for one person. It might be just some community members just trying to do the right thing. Next, you know, they're going to be sued by someone and maybe lose their house. So people are starting to either shut down comments completely or they're actually shutting down the pages. And it's included people like the Tasmanian Premier, for example, the ACT Chief Minister. They both shut down their Facebook pages based on the fear factor. Now, they've got staff running those pages. They can moderate those, but they still think it's too big a risk that they may be sued for comments that someone else makes on their page. I think there's a long way to go in this. I think we'll have to see some more precedents come through, and I think there'll almost have to be some poor sacrificial lamb that'll be a community group that will be sued and see how that plays out in the courts. But it's a bit of a shame if we lose that community contact.
All right, Matthew, we will watch out for you for the Tech Talk podcast. And
Absolutely.
That's going well, isn't it?
It's going well. Still sitting at number 10 at the moment in Australia, but the number one Australian produced podcast, so I'm very happy with that. And it's some of the topics that we talk about here, Chris, and some extra topics we add in as well. So, yeah, if you're not doing anything, if you've got half an hour to blow, then go and look for Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson.
Enjoy the rest of your short week.
Thanks, mate.